Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelson, professional horse trainer and a little bit stuffy, excuse me. And with me is Deb Romero, my good friend and certified Alexander Technique instructor. Yeah, I don't know. I have this allergy thing coming and going, so
Oh,
I'm a little,
yeah, that
and
time of year.
well, I have no known allergies, so I can't figure out why I get stuffy and why it goes away, but we'll figure it out. So today's topic, I thought we'd talk about the horse's thoracic sling because every time I sort of peruse
The
Facebook
internet.
or if I look at, like, I'll get flyers or emails about lectures on biomechanics or training for correct biomechanics, that kind of thing. And it finally occurred to me, and then I hear the words all the time or see people write about it. The thoracic sling has become a big point of emphasis.
Yeah,
And I'm like, well, it's important, but the
it's always
way,
about the legs. We're always looking at the legs, but there for us, that's not the problem.
well, the leg kinematics are dictated by the use of the axial skeleton. And
Right,
I know that's kind of a mouthful, but leg kinematics just means the precise geometry of the flight path of the leg. That's what a
right,
leg kinematic is. And the axial skeleton is the skull, spine, and I always include the pelvis, but
right.
skull, spine, rib cage, pelvis. And so it's like, there's still a large obsession over the use of the horse's neck and head,
Oh,
but
that's true.
but it seems to me like this advancement of biomechanics is really only shifting from the neck and head to the shoulders and the thoracic sling. And I
Interesting.
go, but the real deal is like everything behind that. It's everything behind that that is mechanically most important.
I think,
Although,
yeah, I think people they think they can control, we've probably talked about this before, but they can control the hind end by manipulating the front end.
yeah, and I wonder, a little bit of a different thought is because the thoracic sling and the neck and head are the most highly mobile parts
Mm,
of the mechanical body for a horse, right? They have the
hmm
greatest range of motion naturally. That because it has a great range of motion, we think we can manipulate it
Oh.
easier.
That's true. I agree. Well, and we're so dewy with our hands.
Do we?
Dewy.
Yeah.
We have to manipulate. We want to manipulate with our hands.
Yeah. So let's talk about like just the difference between horses and people. So horses skeletally don't have a clavicle, a
Right.
collarbone, which is what sort of connects the arms to the rib cage and spine,
Mm,
right? So a horse has the thoracic sling is sort of like what we call a rotator cuff. It's a whole bunch of different body parts. It's a whole
right.
bunch of different muscles, tendons, and ligaments that all together support the stability, the position, the use of the horse's front legs. And it very much muscularly ties into the neck, but also the upper back where the front of the saddle sits.
And I think
So,
that's a real important point you just said. It's the bones are the bones. How are the muscles, tendons, fascia, ligaments being used to move those bones around?
right.
Yeah.
And the difference for horses in the use of the neck, sorry, I'm so stuffy. In the use of like the position of the head, the neck, and the use of the front legs, whether they're sort of trudging along or moving freely or opening with adduction and abduction, lateral movement left and right, if whether it's mobile or not mobile, let's put it that way, depends
Mhm.
100% on how much that horse is using the front end for weight bearing and stability.
Good
I,
point.
I go
Mm-hmm.
those because you can cross your horse's legs sideways over ground poles till the cows come home. But if your horse is still habitually overloading the front legs or using the front end for stability because the back and hindquarter are not stable, the
Right.
hindquarter is not engaged enough to even gain stability, then good luck.
Good luck.
Good luck.
Well, actually, if you're that, I see that, like you said, thoracic sling, whatever it is, on online all the time, and I think we're not looking at we're looking at the symptom, not the cause, as usual.
Yes, I would
Yeah.
agree with that
And it's the
100%.
same thing in people with thoracic outlet syndrome.
So
The
what's
symptom is
thoracic outlet syndrome?
syndrome in the medical world is we idiopathically don't even really know what causes it.
Yeah.
There's no like, aha, it's that.
Well,
Um,
even the word idiopathic means unknown cause.
right. So
That's what it means.
this anytime you hear syndrome to me means, we really don't know. We just stamp that on it and say, go on your way.
Yeah.
But what I see in people, so
Oh, and no, that'll be
anatomically,
$500 for muscle relaxers.
yeah, anatomically, and I'm going to make it really simple.
Okay.
The nerves that innervate your arm run down your neck and under into your shoulder. So if you've got this rolled forward shoulders, like we see with everybody on their computers, on their phones, it can block or shut off and pinch those nerves. And so you're going to get the first thing we see, and maybe this happens with horses, is pain. You'll get a pain indicator shooting down your arm or something like that. Then the next level is usually some sort of numbness or tingling, which means you're just going to the next step.
Yeah.
So that's what I hear from people, and it's a total use postural problem. It's not anatomical at all.
It's functional, it's not pathological. Yeah.
Exactly. It is a
Yeah.
total functional problem.
Well, that's even your
Unless you
big
have a severe
mare.
trauma, whatever.
It's sort of what you're describing is what we've talked about before with your big mare going lame on the left front that looked like she had a problem on her left front leg,
Mhm.
maybe her left shoulder, a lot of muscular tightness, a lot, and that pain could have been that same nerve pain, nerve impingement
I
pain,
agree.
but it was coming from an arthritic change in her neck.
Right, right.
Yes.
And I don't know if I've shared, we have since re-x-rayed her. And with the work that we do, we've actually seen a little bit of positive bony changes. The vet said definitely not negative. We didn't go backwards in the last
Hmm.
7 years.
Yeah, you
So
didn't increase the bony
no more
changes, right?
arthritic bony changes. She saw even a little bit more space in between the cervical vertebrae, 5, 6, 7.
That's
So
amazing.
just shows you the work that we do can help horses and people.
Yeah, because when you have what we call mechanical lameness, which just means dysfunctional use of the body, what does
Right.
dysfunctional mean? Dysfunctional means the body has an inherent design. And so it gives us the blueprint. And like in engineering and architecture, the saying is the form is developed out of the functional need, which is probably
Good
how
point.
bodies evolved, right?
Right.
But now
Makes sense.
we've got what we've got. So biomechanics to me, or correct mechanical use of the body, means we understand which body parts, which structures in the body are meant to be used in a stabilizing capacity,
Hmm.
and which parts of the body are meant to be used in a mobility for a range of motion, for
Right.
more mobility. And balance is sort of shifting what we would call energy, maybe body weight, maybe core muscle use, when we focus on stabilizing the parts of the body that are meant to create stability for a body in motion, then I find the horse can self-regulate or control their internal body weight, and they're preventing sort of that use of having to stabilize in parts of the body that were designed for mobility. So
Yeah.
that's what the front end of the horse is. It's structurally, horses' front legs are the equivalent anatomically to human arms,
Right.
right? But our arms, like we have a scapula, we have the shoulder joint, elbow joint, wrist joint, and basically the hooves are the phalanges, right? It's like our fingers. And so, and the cannon bones on the front legs are actually like our, what do you call these? The bones in the
Metacarpal.
hand, metacarpal. Metatarsal are the feet, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And so what we refer to as the horse's front knee is actually a wrist bone, a wrist joint.
Oh, that's a
It,
cool explanation.
yeah, it's a carpus. And that's technically, the vet calls it a carpus. We call it a knee, sort of just because it looks like a knee, right? But it's technically a wrist. And then the horse's elbow joint is at the back of the front leg, right where we girth up. So that
Yep.
little bony round joint, that's their elbow. Their shoulder joint is what we call the point of the shoulder, right?
That's what we
So
see. Yeah.
that's what we see out
Mhm.
towards the front part of the front leg. And then the scapula, everybody knows about the scapula if you've ever had a saddle fitting, right?
It's it's
It's
huge.
massive.
It's
So
huge.
we can think of the scapula, humerus, all these bones, tibia, fibia, it's all the same down to the fingertips that are the hooves, but there's no collarbone. So that collarbone is the only bony attachment or skeletal attachment on the human arm apparatus, correct?
Hmm.
Okay,
That attaches to the skeleton.
right. And so in the human, would you say arms are designed for stability or mobility?
I wish I could remember the Alexander teacher that told me this. I think it was David Gorman that said, the arms are there just to get the hands wherever they need to go. And I love that. I love that. I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Otherwise, if you couldn't move your hands, why have them? So
Yeah.
obviously, mobility is what they're for.
Well, even if we look at the design, like the shoulder socket, which is a ball and socket joint in the shoulder, right? And our hips are also a ball and socket joint.
Mhm.
So we have two of the same ball and socket designs to
Right.
these two different major joints. But the difference is the socket on the shoulder joint, and this is why we tear rotator cuffs all the time and have shoulder pain. That socket is like a very shallow soap dish. And the ball sort of slides around the
Mhm.
socket. So that design, if you were an engineer designing that, you would be designing it for the function of big range of motion, high mobility,
Mhm.
right? Range of motion. So our arms are amazing how, we can move them in any and all directions. Then if we look at the hip joint, it's still a ball and socket design, but now the socket is in the pelvis, which is a much stronger, more stable bony structure. It's also narrower and deeper
It's
compared
very deep.
to the shoulder joint, right? So that depth and sort of tight fitting, if you were an engineer, right, it would allow mobility, but not the same range of motion as a very shallow socket. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah.
So just the design of the ball and socket from the femur to the pelvis, that hip joint, tells us, yes, it's meant to be mobile, but equally meant to be stable,
Hmm.
right? So those when I talk about mechanics, that's what I'm talking about. I go, if you don't know features of the anatomy, then how do you know what the function is meant to be? That's why you and I geek out reading research papers because all that all
We
that
have to
research,
have that.
you have to have it because you have to know, like, what is the range of motion between the vertebra? Why isn't it as great a range of motion as the shoulder?
Right.
Right. And at
Well,
one
and
point,
yeah, and then you take into the also the difference between the shoulder and the pelvis is, the pelvis bears weight. There's a lot of, that's a big deal.
right. So if we look at the skeleton and just Google the skeleton for a horse, we could go through there and see where are the biggest, heaviest bones?
Mhm.
Where are the joints that are built for stability versus the joints that are built for mobility? Right. And that's how you and I understand bodies.
Right.
Because on any body, number one, the head's going to be really freaking heavy because skulls
Mhm.
are always super bony because they're protecting the central nervous system and pretty much all the five senses, right? Even though we think of our sense of touch a little bit more through our skin, we still can feel things through the skin on our head. So that skull is really protecting a lot. So it's going to be heavy, right? So a lot of bone tells us meant to be stable or it's protecting something super important, right?
Yeah, how much does a human skull weighs between 10 and 15 pounds? I don't think a lot of people know that. But
A
that's a
horse
lot to stabilize on
to
this little
balance.
tiny skinny neck.
Yeah.
I call it the relationship between a bowling ball and a pencil.
Or a broomstick.
Or
Yeah.
a broomstick, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
the ball
the
on a
head of a
stick.
horse is heavy.
No, that's a good way to think about it because usually the skull on a horse is close to 10% of their body weight, right?
Wow.
So it's not really in pounds. It's sort of looked at percentage because we have minis to drafts, right?
Right.
So if you take your average 1,000-pound horse, that's 100-pound head. That's a lot.
Mhm.
So if we think of the design of the horse's body, right? Like you're talking about, the human balance is
Mhm.
sort of that idea of balancing a bowling ball on a broomstick,
Yeah,
right?
that's what we be doing.
So now we're going to turn that broomstick a little more horizontal rather than
Mhm.
vertical and put the bowling ball on the end with a hinge, right?
Right.
So now we have this long lever with a heavy weight, right? So the forces of motion, the path of least resistance, if this is your structure, a horse has a tabletop and four legs with this long broomstick and a bowling ball attached to one end,
Put that picture
right?
in your head. Oh, let's ride that.
And I go, who designs a table like that, right? And the reason they have this long stick and bowling ball is for foraging for food, being able to see more than 360 degrees around them, being able to see high and low. And so that a mobility of the neck and head is part of their survival,
Right.
right? But if you look at it, it's also a little bit of a design problem for the horse. So that long lever and heavy weight that is the head and neck, if we do nothing, right? Like horses in nature are moving 25, 30 miles a day in a relaxed way. So they're learning how to resist body weight and gain stability through the pelvis, hindquarters, and back. And that's what offsets that extra weight and mass that's sort of hanging out there without leg support. But when we sit on them, we sort of add to the problem, right? And in
Right.
domestic life, if we're not actively helping horses learn to use their body correctly, the odds are not in their favor because they just don't move as much.
Right.
You know, we provide food and water. So even if we have our horse in a herd of 30 in a 200-acre pasture, they're still not going to move all day because the food and water is right there,
Right. Yeah.
right? Wild horses constantly have to move in search of food and water for survival. So that's how I call it in a horse going from crawling to walking, right? So when humans crawl, we put weight on our arms. And if we stay there, we would damage our structures because it's not
Right.
meant to be weight bearing. And we have to go through a process of learning to walk.
Yes.
And same with horses. Because of that long neck, the long broomstick and bowling ball on the front end, they have to kind of learn how to counteract that excess weight and mass with how they use the back and hindquarters. So if the back and hindquarters aren't stable, then all the weight with every stride, with every movement, all the
Mm.
time is being sort of pulled by gravity forward and down. So that's why I just go, you can cross those front legs, but if you haven't offloaded the bowling ball, you're never going to supple the muscles of a horse's thoracic sling.
So what do you mean by offload the bowling ball?
So I used to think, and it kind of makes sense on a really simplistic level, that if a horse didn't have excess weight on the front legs, they would be shifting it to the hind legs.
Okay.
That's not really how it works. It's more complicated than that,
Right.
right? So what a horse has to do is stabilize the spine, place the pelvis in a certain degree of forward rotation. That's what we call engagement, right?
Okay.
So the pelvis has to move around the hip joint, which is what brings the hind legs closer to the center of the body, right? So it's just like you teach, getting up from a chair is easier if you put your feet closer to the center of your body,
I like that.
right?
Yeah.
And it's
I
the
mean, it's
same
just
thing.
pure physics.
It's pure physics. And every HR department in America has a poster that shows humans how to safely pick up a big box because we don't know, right? So work-related injuries come from overusing our arms to pick up heavy weight instead of putting our legs and pelvis closer and
Right.
using our back, pelvis, and legs to lift the weight. That's kind of how a horse prevents the body weight from going to the front legs. So if you imagine, and most people have seen this poster or have been instructed how to use their back and knees to pick up a heavy weight, right? You and I and every woman who owns a horse and does their own barn knows if you're picking up those bags of feed and those full buckets of water with your arms straight, you're more likely to hurt yourself and you're going to tighten your neck and shoulders excessively,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the horse's experience is like that that distance, right, of the weight is hard to
Right.
manage. So when a horse is correctly engaged, it means that the pelvis is in, I forget whether they call it cranial caudal or the technical term. I get very dyslexic about it. But basically, the pelvis is rotating what I call forward around the hip joint, which is what's placing the hind legs closer to their center, closer to where the saddle sits
So you're say placing like in movement
during movement. So
during movement.
the
Okay.
forward placement of the hind leg
Is
is just
more
having
forward. You see more of the leg reaching under the horse than pushing out behind the horse.
ideally equal.
Right.
Ideally equal, because
Okay.
people who are manipulating engagement
Uh,
are trying to either restrict the backwards direction of the hoof pushing off, or they're trying to force the placement of the leg deeper to the center of the body. And you can actually start tearing stuff like,
wow.
yeah, you can actually create knee injuries, cruciate ligament injuries, meniscus injuries, all kinds of things. And so that's why you don't mess with leg placement. You let the horse figure out leg placement
Okay.
because there's people out there with bamboo poles and whips trying to, make the hind legs or the hind hooves
Oh, okay.
get
Do go
deeper.
underneath, but it's not the legs that you really should be talking to.
The legs are
It's the
the
back.
result. The
Right,
legs
it's
are
the
the
back.
result,
It's the spine,
right? So the
which is the
legs,
same with people.
right. So the deeper hoof placement, if we trace that up, means
Mm,
more movement of the pelvis around the hip joint. How does that happen? That mobility of the pelvis can only happen when the whole spine works as one unit in a stable way, all the way
good
to the
point.
skull. So you can't just take
Bingo.
a whip and whack your horse's feet forward and think it's going to help. You're more likely going to start tearing some tendons, ligaments, have joint issues, and develop pain issues. And it's kind of the same like the thoracic sling that everybody's now exercising apparently on Facebook is, first of all, if there's too much weight, you're never going to gain mobility. And it would be
Wow.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it's, you see it with what you call the thoracic
Outlet
syndrome,
syndrome.
outlet
Hmm.
syndrome. Yeah. That unless you've changed the coordination, you can't change, you can't restore. You just can't restore the body, no matter what exercise you're doing or manipulation tactic you're using, or meds or diet or whatever. You just
I
can't.
think yeah, and it goes back to that we really need to look at that it's one whole functioning unit. You can't
And
isolate the legs and think that that's going to take care of the problem.
right.
It's looking at the symptom, not the cause. It's the same thing. The cause is the whole spine is not organized properly to do the activity. And we see that with people all the time.
Well, it's what we talked about a few podcasts ago. The priority of stability for a body is directly
Hmm.
related to feeling safe,
Yep.
right? So if we look at a body, what balance is to me is equal parts stability and mobility. That's what makes graceful movement. That's what makes
Right.
effortless movement. That's what looks beautiful, feels great. It's everything we want, right? So how
It's
does that,
available. I think we talked about everything's of functioning and available to you,
right? And so how do
accessible.
you get that availability? Because the body has to be stable somewhere, or we couldn't function at all.
Right.
We couldn't get out of a chair. We couldn't drive a car. We couldn't walk, right? So if there isn't an essential stability of the body during motion, we have a failure of the system, complete failure of the system, right? So just like us, horses can use the parts of the body that were designed to be mobile, can fill in and provide stability
Hmm.
when needed, right? That's a step. That's what we do before we have a complete failure of the system.
Right.
We can start misusing the parts that were designed for mobility, can easily become the parts that are providing stability.
Hmm.
That's a horse that's heavy on the forehand,
Right.
right? That's a horse that's upside down or in spinal extension, right?
Extension, high
Dropping
head,
the
low
back.
back.
So anything that disengages the hindquarter, drops the back, puts weight on the forehand, restricts, sort of um I got to say restricts the head and neck a lot because
Mm,
that's just going to like when we overly control the head and neck position, again, head and cervical spine designed mostly for mobility,
right.
right? Looking for food, looking for water, looking for predators. That's the job of the head and neck. So when we use leveraged bits and a lot of rein pressure, we are creating stability
Right.
where there should be mobility. That makes no sense to me,
Me either.
right? So then we wonder, why is our horse on the forehand? And oh, now I have shoulder pain, um, idiopathic nerve pain, idiopathic lameness, right? All these syndromes. Why? And then I like it, the physical therapist, because I found the same was sort of true in Alexander. A lot of Alexander technique instructors start with the head, neck, shoulders,
Mhm.
right? Because it's important. So I
Right.
kind of get it's a little bit encouraging that that's become the focus of these biomechanic platforms on different social media. It's obsessed with the thoracic sling. At least from my perspective, I just see way too much mention of it. And part of that problem is because we're told we lift the back by restricting the use of the head and neck with rain
Oh,
resistance.
wow.
And I go, how's that working for the horses? Like, I don't really see that working.
Mm-mm.
We've been doing it a couple hundred years now. I think we've given it a good shot.
Well, and just by with my mare, I've actually got proof that that doesn't work.
It made it worse.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And
And
that
she was that
by
kind of personality that was having none of it.
none of that,
She was not quietly going into
no.
lameness.
We called her airs above the ground because
Yeah.
that's where she spent most of her time.
Whether you were on or not. Yeah. Yeah.
So
She's a big, powerful mare. So that was
it was
not,
not fun at
yeah.
all. Luckily, because it was both of us thinking, wow, we've got to figure this out or we're going to get killed.
No, and that's where we began,
We
sort
did.
of feeling our way through it. I go,
Hmm.
if we are not stabilizing the axial skeleton, skull, spine,
Hmm.
and pelvis, left to right, as well as front to back,
I
as well
agree.
as up to down, and stabilizing, even if it's a minimal degree of pelvic rotation around the hip joint, which means one small single degree of better engagement,
Yeah.
right? We have to coordinate the use of the spine and pelvis kind of as one unit. You can't be shoving that pelvis forward when the
Oh, you're
spine,
saying
when this,
forcing it. It has to be, it's like this language, it's this evolvement of an art kind of thing to me in the human body. It's an evolution of use.
yeah. Well, and knowing that stability is a primary issue for any living body, right? Stability is sort of primary to our
Right.
existence.
Right.
That's what sort of got me thinking, where in the body is stability meant to be held, right? And if we go through in our necropsies and research, the way we know the primary function of any part of the skeleton is stability is the limited range of motion
Mhm.
in the joints between the bones, right? The limitation by design of mobility tells us, these body parts are meant to be stable. This part of the skeleton is meant to be stable. And then, sure enough, you find these insanely strong ligaments, tendon systems, fascia, right? You see all the soft tissue that's also sort of supporting the stability where the joints have the most limited range of motion and sort of the maybe, I don't want to say densest bones or not, I won't want to say biggest bones, but it's
Mm,
like there's a
that's a
quality
whole
that
nother
shows us
conversation.
it is. So let's stick with joints, right? So the joint's natural range of motion sort of tells us this area of the skeleton is meant to stabilize the body during motion.
Right. Hmm.
And these joints that have an inherent greater range of motion are meant to be the mobile part that reaches or
Yeah,
strides
and
or
another way to look at it, and just in simplistic terms, it doesn't apply everywhere, is that the muscles that are closest to the bones are more stabilizing than the ones that are external.
yeah, we
So,
even I
and that
think went
makes
over
that's a simplistic way to look at it, but for the
no,
common person.
it's part of the whole picture. Like
Mhm.
what we're doing is having to look at the body as reverse engineering. We're having
Right.
to kind of somebody designed this, whatever, whether whatever you believe in that created the human or the horse, the design is already there.
Right.
It's what we've got to work with, right? So what biomechanics frees me to do is sort of understand how it's supposed to work. And
Mhm.
then in training, guide it to work that way. That to me is
Bingo.
biomechanics.
But
And I go,
I
but
don't
people
think
get
most
so,
people know will are the educate themselves in that manner.
well, I don't see a lot of it. I mean, I see a lot of good ideas starting to filter through. I see the direction of
I
thought
hope so.
going the right way. But I think what's a little frustrating is going, as long as we're sort of focused on the jaw, the TMJ, the
Mm,
neck, the pole, the shoulders, the thoracic sling, like all of that, I just go meant to be mobile. Can't be mobile if the back half is not
it's not
stable.
stable. That's the
And
simplistic term. Yeah.
yeah, and what
That's
I
just
see is people's emphasis is on trying to generate mobility, wondering why the horse isn't mobile where they should be mobile, not
good
having
point.
a clue what a stable back should feel like, right? Or how
Hmm.
to engage the hindquarters, or how to stabilize the spine and the pelvis and the rib cage as a priority of balance,
That
right?
has to become that to me has to come first
Or
to
even
get the
have
mobility.
exactly, that's my point.
Yeah.
I go, if you don't have stability where the body
Where
is
it's supposed
meant
to be.
to handle it,
Yeah.
then you're using the wrong muscles. You're using the mobile part of the body for stability. So what happens, and this is actually what I see as the end result is somebody with the best of intentions trying to help their tight horse loosen up through the thoracic sling,
Hmm.
do all these exercises,
Hmm.
massages, therapies, muscle relaxes, the whole 9 yards. The end result is that horse is in a worse state
Hmm.
because now there is no stability in the body. So you have a resistance to forward motion or a lack of control over forward motion. And you get a lot of shearing, which is like
Yeah.
a unnatural oblique force that goes through the joints. So you start creating arthritis, you start
Hmm.
creating strains to the tendons, ligaments, and soft tissue, and you tax those outer muscles at the same time you're weakening the core muscles. So I just go, there's no benefit in taking a horse. Like the reason the horse is tight in the TMJs, the jaw, the neck, congested between the jaw and the neck, tight through the thoracic sling, restricted in front leg mobility, whether it's forward, back, or adduction. All of that's the result, tells us that horse lost stability where it should be.
Hmm.
So the front end is just filling in.
Right. And to ask the front end to all of a sudden
Don't do
become,
that. Yeah.
don't do that. You're going to get a lot of
A
problems.
lot of problems. And it
Yeah.
becomes what I find more complicated versions of dysfunction and compensation.
Mm.
Gets really complicated when we monkey with things the wrong way,
Yeah.
right? And the other big question is like, it's not even in a lot of training literature how to build up the stability of the skull, spine, and pelvis, how to get engagement, how to lift the back without using the reins,
Oh, I agree. Like I
without
said, we're
using
so
bit
dewy with our
leverage,
hands and think we can
right?
manipulate with our hands. We forget, we have a head, neck, back, and pelvis too.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Yeah.
where it should be coming from, not your hands.
No, and if I say the word collection, what's the first image that pops in your mind? Reins, bit, head, neck,
Negative backwards pull on the reins.
right?
And they call that stabilizing.
Yeah. And so when we artificially stabilize the front end of a horse by overusing bit leverage, overusing rein pressure, right? Or rein resistance. So far, it has not created stability through the back and hindquarter. It's only created stability through the front end. That's
Right. And
why
then you
we,
see the drop, and I've seen it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the vision I get, because I'm always looking for uniformity of a body. And what I see in a horse that's on the forehand is I see this massive front end, and then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And there's this little bitty hind end back here with nothing.
yeah,
And I'm like, oh man, we got to work on that.
yeah, you can literally, if you kind of like put your hand up and divide the horse in
Yeah.
half, you can start to see proportionally,
Mhm.
right? Proportionally, that neck looks too short for that back, or that
Yeah.
front
Just
end
that's
looks
how
like,
I look at things. It's like that. It looks like all pieces instead of one flowing thing.
yeah, and then it gets labeled as bad conformation.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, which means, oh, my horse just has a high neck set. Oh, my horse just has a long back. Oh, my horse just has a small hindquarter. Oh, my horse is sickle hocked, cow hocked, toed in, toed out, over at the knees, right? All of those are conformational points, asymmetrical through the shoulders. I go, to me, all of those are postural issues
It's all
that,
posture and people too. It's the
and
same
it
thing.
is completely 100% functional. That means it's also changeable. The only
Right.
thing I consider actual confirmation, I go, you're not going to change the length or the density or the sort of measurement of a bone.
Right.
Not going to change that. When it's done growing, that's the size you got, right? But it's like even when I did Alexander work, I used to consider my conformation as being one of those people with a long torso and short legs. And that was sort of what I looked like. And after going through a lot of Alexander lessons with you and Jana, I was like, I looked at a picture of myself riding and I went, when did I grow legs? Like I suddenly looked very different proportionally. And
Right.
I was like, I'm the same body, but I
Mhm.
changed my coordination. I changed my posture enough. I changed my mechanical use in
Right.
a way that made me photograph even. It wasn't just my opinion, it was everybody's opinion. Oh, you got those. My friend from Australia used to say I had smarty wombat legs, or I had a jockey body, right? And so,
Right.
and all that was my habit of pulling,
Pulling
tightening the
up with the
muscles
legs.
and pulling up through the
That's
legs.
huge in women especially.
Yeah. And
Especially
so
women equestrians.
to experience that myself and to see, horses in their 20s, Prima in her 30s, still sort of like getting the fountain of youth as you change posture and coordination, you just look more proportional, which is sort of what makes
Mhm.
it seem pleasing to the eye.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And so all of that is changeable. You're not going to get it as long as you're focused on these freaking sideways over ground poles. Like, just quit wasting your time.
Well, and that goes back to the theory that we have to work
Do
with the
something.
kinematics of the legs.
Yeah, we have to change the legs or change
Mhm.
the neck in order to get into the torso. And I go, no, you don't.
It's the opposite.
It's the
I go
opposite.
straight to the torso on people.
Absolutely.
Because that's Grand Central Station.
And if it's not stable, no amount of effort is
Mhm.
going to make better leg kinematics or better use of the head and neck. It's just not going to happen
Exactly.
because as if the body is not stable through the midline, then the appendages, right? The arms
Right.
and legs have to create stability or the whole body would fail to function.
Should more than survive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to me, balance is about looking for stability through the midline and through the hindquarters and let the legs take care of themselves. And guess what? something happens, like I have to educate a lot of my clients that as we're riding along, focused on the spine and pelvis, I don't know why, but I think because on a horse, the thoracic sling is so intricate and involved, there'll be a moment where there's a muscle tone change
Hmm.
spontaneously. And it
I've
kind
seen
of,
it too.
yeah, the shoulder just gives, the leg just gives.
Hmm.
And my technical term for it is a shoulder clunk, because
That I
that's kind
call
of
them the
what it looks
clunk.
like. It's a clunk. Feels like the horse stepped in a hole, but there's no hole. And those spontaneous changes of muscle tone absolutely happen without anything
I totally
special.
agree.
At the very same time that the body is becoming stable through the midline and pelvis, the thoracic sling is just changing
Does
tone.
its thing.
I don't have to do anything special. It
No,
just releases the tension
no.
because it's no longer required for stability. So it just can spontaneously become more mobile, adjust the muscle tone, change the range of motion, all of the things we're trying to get through these tasks and exercises as therapeutic. I go, that just happens as soon as you get the midline and the hindquarters stable.
Yeah.
You don't have to do anything special, it just happens. And sometimes horses will make spontaneous chiropractic adjustments. I go, happens all the time.
I recently got a clarinet player as a client and having problems, with her hands and her arms, and I didn't focus on that at all.
Yeah.
I focused on her relationship of her head, neck, back, and pelvis and sitting in a chair. So, yeah,
And
the
especially
limbs.
with the clarinet in her hand.
Oh yeah, just
Yes.
having her the stimulus of saying pick up your clarinet. I mean, that's where we were
Yeah.
because that's a huge stimulus of oh my gosh, and she totally collapsed and fell apart just to pick it up.
Well, and what happens is, and this happens to everybody, I finally understood it sort of in hindsight when we're focused on learning to play the clarinet. Where's our mind? Our mental focus is external, right?
Right.
We're
Good
thinking
point.
about our fingers and our hand use. We're mentally focused on notes, music. We're trying to get this
Hmm.
coordination called playing the clarinet. So the last thing on our mind is how are we using our midline? Because
Hmm.
all of our focus is sort of external rather
Exactly.
than gently between internal, external,
Right.
right? And so that's exactly what you teach is you go, okay, let's bring it back to an internal focus while we do the exact same freaking job.
Right. Exactly.
How are we doing it? Are we stable through our midline? Are we stable through our pelvis, right?
Hmm.
Are we using our legs or are we using our arms for stability while we're doing whatever we're doing? And that's sort of how horses work on a mechanical level. I go, this is not my opinion either, and this is
No,
not my
no,
idea.
it's
I just
just
wanted to
physics.
know how shit works. Like the
Hmm.
design is the design. You either learn to work with it functionally, or all of your ideas just sort of lead to maybe good results on some horses, maybe terrible results on other horses. Maybe, it's like, but it's so easy to blame the horse.
But it's
It
not
just takes a
healthy.
long
It's
time
just
to
not
change.
healthy long term able to maintain. That's why these horses are breaking down
Yeah.
at 14, 15 years old when that should just be the highlight of their time.
Even in our lifetime, when I was a kid, your competitive horse was at its prime between 12 to 16.
Mhm.
That was considered the prime age of a
That's the
competition
good
horse,
horse.
right? People now go, your horse is 10 and still competing.
Right.
Like, oh no, you should retire that horse. It's like 9, 10, done with competition, right? And then we look at race horses that are completely washed up by 5 or 6 years old. I go, so no, that isn't. That isn't. And even like I said, maybe I'm aging myself, but as a Gen Xer, it used to be, it used to be that that was not the perceived norm, that a horse 15, 12 years old to 16 years old should be in retirement,
Mhm.
right? And even one of the videos I fell in love with that Jean-Luc did on his ex-jumping horse. There's a video on YouTube somewhere if you
Mhm.
Google
I've seen
Jean-Luc
it.
Cornille doing the Piaffe. And he's on a horse named Lafayette, big chestnut horse.
Mhm.
And he just did a quick video of him doing Piaffe. And it was like the most beautiful, correct, gorgeous Piaffe. And so I started learning from him because I was like, wow, I haven't seen one like that. And when I talked to him about it, that horse, when they shot that video, all they did was go out, pee off, get off, done, right? The horse was 27 years old.
Wow.
He looked like a 12-year-old horse,
Yeah, he
maybe
does.
15. He was beautifully muscled. He could go straight into piaffe, straight out of piaffe, take a break, go right back into it, go out of it, take two, take three. Okay, we got it, we're done, and never even break a sweat, not even breathing hard,
And that's
right?
that level of healthy spinal stabilization that that the horse is like with the Alexander technique, you use less energy
It's
when you're better
obviously
organized. It's really simple.
when your car mechanics are optimized, you're more fuel efficient, you're
Right.
safer, the car is more stable, right? If the tire alignment goes out, if there's not enough oil, like all these, if the
Simple.
steering wheel pulls a little bit, if you have a sticky brake, right? Or sticky, well, I don't think, I don't know if anybody uses a clutch or manual transmission anymore,
Anymore.
but if you start grinding gears, right, then
Right.
you can start doing damage. So it's the same with a body. And if we don't know how the body is meant to function, so part of my rant, I guess I feel like I'm on today, is I go, come on, you guys, if we're calling it biomechanics, if people are taking the time to go listen to a lecture on mechanics, let's really explain,
How
how
it's
that,
supposed to work.
not only that, but the whole picture. Let's
Right.
quit picking apart body
Body
parts.
parts.
I
But
go because
doesn't work that way. It just doesn't. You
it
can't
doesn't work
isolate
that way. And
at
this
all.
like emphasis I keep seeing on the thoracic sling that's making me a little crazy is making me crazy because I go, it's a waste of time. We are not helping horses if that's
We
where
are
the
not
focus
helping
is.
horses is the important thing. We're
Yeah.
going about it the wrong way. We're trying to help, but we're
We're
going about it.
trying to help. The intention is right, but the
But we're
effect
not
is
educating ourselves enough to know how movement really works.
not in a way that makes a positive
Hmm.
influence on our horse's well-being. I go,
Exactly.
I do see it moving that direction, but I get a little impatient with the slowness of it and the change of focus because if we're not really looking at the whole individual, that it's a system, right? It's an engineered
Hmm.
design that has systems and functions and coordinations. And if we don't kind of step back and look at the whole
Good
tree,
point.
right? We can get caught up on one branch of the tree.
Well, and that's what Jean-Luc said about my mare, because he was there. He said, you guys either figure this out for the good of the horse or you don't.
Yeah.
It's really, to us, it's that simple.
Yes.
We got to figure out the best way for the horse.
Yeah. No, that's
And
my
that,
motivation. I go, the side
yeah,
effect to me is it improves performance and longevity and
you get
soundness.
a healthier horse. Yeah.
And it
And
feels
that's what I've got. I've
amazing.
got a healthier horse at 22
Yeah.
than I had in her teens.
Well, and Prima still wanting, coming to the gate, pick me, right? Wanting to do her little long rein work every day at
Yeah.
31,
Yeah.
31 years old.
It's that that's important to us anyway.
Yeah, to do right by my horse.
to do right by our horses. Yeah,
I go, my horse has given me a lot. I value the relationship and I want to do right by my horse. And one of the ways
I
I can
agree.
do right, a huge part of ensuring health is daily coordination of movement. I go,
Hmm.
that part is never connected to health. It's connected to
Good point.
performance, but it's not
Hmm.
connected to the health of our horse. And I go, it is very much integral part
Yeah,
of health or ill health. You just you can't have dysfunctional use of the body day after day after day and remain healthy.
good point.
Yeah, for us or for horses. And for us, we don't really feel the effects till we're about 60.
I'm not going there.
I'm not going there either. I go, I refuse. I refuse. I'm going to be mucking stalls at 100.
Yep, that would be us.
All right, we better wrap it up. We've been kind of digressed at the end there. But thanks everyone for joining us. We hope you found this helpful. And if you have been focused on the thoracic sling, it's important information. You'll use it, it'll be useful, but don't get stuck there. Don't get stuck
Ask
there.
more questions.
Ask more questions. That is only one piece of the whole body.
Hmm.
And don't obsess over leg placement or head and neck use. The deal is
Exactly.
in the midline and the hindquarters.
Amen.
That's where the focus needs to go. So thanks. Please like, share, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. And we hope you're enjoying the podcast. Well, we keep going anyways. So thanks for joining us. All
Bye,
right. Bye,
everybody.
everybody.